There are moments in life when silence feels louder than words and departure hurts more than betrayal. You stood there, waiting for an apology that never came, hoping for understanding, for closure, for some small acknowledgement that your heart mattered. But instead, you were handed a goodbye, a quiet, cold ending to a story that deserved compassion, not disappearance. When someone leaves without explanation, without closure, and without even acknowledging the pain they caused, it creates a silence that cuts deep. It's not just the loss of a person, it's the loss of understanding, the loss of meaning. You replay every moment in your mind, trying to make sense of what went wrong, trying to find the missing piece that could explain why love turned into distance and why care turned into indifference. This is what emotional abandonment feels like, an invisible wound that doesn't bleed, but quietly drains your spirit. You deserve to be heard, to be seen, to be understood. Instead, you were left to interpret their silence as your fault. But it never was. Emotional abandonment is not just about someone walking away, it's about someone withdrawing their presence long before their body leaves. It's the unanswered messages, the fading affection, the sudden coldness in their voice. It's the way they begin to exist elsewhere, even when they're right beside you. And the worst part is that you feel it happening. You feel them detaching, but you keep hoping they'll come back emotionally before they leave physically. You keep telling yourself that maybe they're tired, maybe they're stressed, maybe it's just a phase. You build excuses to protect the illusion of care because accepting the truth that they've already left in spirit is too painful to face. When they finally say goodbye, or when they vanish without warning, the shock isn't just in their departure. It's in realizing how long you ignored your own pain to hold the connection together. You think about the countless moments when you gave them comfort, when you stood by them, when you tried to understand their silence, believing it was temporary. But their silence wasn't a pause, it was an exit. You start to question everything. Were you not enough? Did you love too much? Did you miss the signs? Yeah. That's the cruel thing about emotional abandonment. It turns your empathy against you. The very heart that loved becomes the same heart that blames itself for being left behind. Yeah. Sinks and turns you into your care bends. But understanding emotional abandonment is the first step to breaking free from it. It's not your weakness that made someone leave. It's often their inability to confront their own feelings. When a person is not ready to face the discomfort of their actions, they escape, they disappear. Because staying means seeing the pain they've caused. They leave not because you weren't worth staying for, but because they weren't strong enough to stand in the truth with you. And yet you are the one who ends up carrying the emotional weight of both, the sadness of loss and the confusion of not knowing why. You begin to feel invisible, as if your emotions don't matter, as if your story has been cut short without permission. The world around you keeps moving, but your heart feels stuck in a moment that never found its closure. Nights feel longer because your mind keeps replaying the same unanswered questions. Days feel heavier because the emptiness they left behind follows you like a shadow. But even within that silence there is something sacred, a painful awakening. You start realizing that what hurts the most isn't their absence. It's your longing for something that was never truly secure. To understand emotional abandonment is to recognize that you were never broken. You were simply attached to someone who didn't know how to stay. They didn't have the emotional tools to give what you gave freely. And while it may seem unfair, it also reveals something beautiful, that your heart is capable of depth, loyalty, and love that many people are still learning to understand. The pain you feel is proof of your capacity to care, to hope, to give meaning to connection. That is not a weakness, it's your greatest strength. When you face the truth of emotional abandonment, you no longer chase their presence or their apology. You start to see that the goodbye you received was never really about you. It was about their inability to face themselves. And slowly, The silence that once felt unbearable begins to transform into something else, a quiet space for healing. You start listening to your own voice again, the one that was drowned out by their absence. And though the pain remains, it begins to soften, because you finally understand you didn't deserve their goodbye. You deserved their honesty, their care, and their courage to stay. People often disappear when accountability becomes too heavy for them to hold. It's easier to leave than to face the truth of what they've done. It's easier to walk away than to admit they caused pain to someone who only offered love. When people leave instead of taking responsibility, it's not always because they're cruel, it's often because they're afraid. They fear the weight of guilt, the mirror of their own behavior, and the reflection it forces them to see. To apologize means to confront the consequences of one's actions. It requires vulnerability, humility, and the courage to say, "I was wrong." Not everyone is ready for that level of honesty. Many people grow up avoiding discomfort. They learn to bury feelings, to hide from conflict, and to escape whenever emotions grow too intense. So when they hurt someone, instead of owning it, they vanish. They tell themselves it's better this way, that silence will cause less pain. But silence never heals. It only deepens the wound. Leaving without an explanation is a way to protect their ego, not your heart. They leave because facing you means facing themselves. It means standing in the presence of what they destroyed and feeling the weight of remorse. And for some, that is unbearable. When someone walks away without closure, they're not taking the easy road, they're taking the coward's road. Yet even that word coward feels too simple, because beneath their avoidance lies fear, fear of judgment, fear of vulnerability, fear of being seen as flawed. People who cannot face their mistakes often grew up being punished for them. They learned that to admit fault is to invite rejection or shame, so they protect themselves by running. They think distance will erase the damage, that time will blur the memory. But pain doesn't dissolve just because one person turns away, it lingers in the silence, waiting to be acknowledged. And you, the one left behind, end up searching for answers in a story that's already ended. You imagine conversations that never happened, apologies that never came, words that could have changed everything. You tell yourself that maybe if you had said something differently, they would have stayed. Maybe if you had been more patient, they would have realized your worth. But none of that is true. Their leaving had nothing to do with your value. It had everything to do with their avoidance. They left because staying would have required growth, and growth demands accountability. The hardest part of being left without explanation is the emptiness it creates in your heart. You are forced to process emotions that were never shared, to carry a grief that doesn't have a name. You keep expecting them to return, not to stay, but to at least acknowledge what happened. But they rarely do, because once someone chooses avoidance, they build a wall between themselves and truth. They convince themselves it's better not to reopen old wounds, when in reality it's their own guilt they can't face. They live behind emotional distance, while you live with the echoes of unanswered questions. Understanding this doesn't make the pain vanish, but it helps you stop personalizing it. You begin to see that their silence was not a punishment, it was an escape. They weren't punishing you by leaving. They were protecting themselves from the discomfort of being responsible. They thought running would make the guilt quieter, but deep down, every act of avoidance leaves a scar on their own soul, because the truth always finds its way back, even to those who try to hide from it. Sometimes the ones who leave carry their own hidden suffering. They may replay their choices in solitude, haunted by the same moments you grieve, but they won't show it. Pride, shame, or fear keeps them silent. And while you may never see their remorse, it exists, buried under the same fear that made them walk away. To understand why people leave instead of taking responsibility is to see that not everyone has the emotional maturity to meet pain with truth. Some people cannot apologize because they've never learned how. They mistake silence for resolution and distance for healing. But those who avoid accountability never truly find peace. They simply delay their reckoning. They may forget your tears, but life has a way of reminding us of what we refuse to face. And though their leaving felt like rejection, it was actually a confession, a silent admission that they were not ready to be the kind of person your love required them to be. Acknowledgement is one of the most powerful medicines for a wounded heart. When someone looks you in the eyes and says, "I understand that I hurt you," it doesn't erase the pain, but it allows your soul to exhale. It validates your experience. It tells you that what you felt mattered, that your suffering was seen, that your emotions were real. Without acknowledgement, healing becomes incomplete. It's like trying to close a wound that still has a thorn inside. It may appear fine on the surface, but deep within it keeps bleeding quietly. That is what happens when someone walks away without recognizing the damage they left behind. The human heart doesn't only seek justice. It seeks understanding. When people are hurt, they don't just want an apology for the sake of words. They want to know that their pain meant something, that it wasn't invisible. Acknowledgement gives meaning to suffering. It turns chaos into clarity, confusion into compassion. But when someone refuses to acknowledge what they've done, they leave you in a maze of self-doubt. You begin to question your memories, your reactions, even your sanity. You start wondering if you exaggerated, if you were too sensitive, if maybe you deserved their silence. This is the silent cruelty of unacknowledged pain. It makes you feel unseen in your own story. When there is acknowledgement, there is a bridge between hearts. When there isn't, there is a gap filled with uncertainty. You can feel it, the unfinished energy between two people, the words that were never said, the truths that were never faced. You sense the emotional weight that lingers, not because love still exists, but because closure never came. That's why acknowledgement is not a weakness, it's an act of strength. It requires a person to confront their own actions without excuses, to admit they caused harm, even if it wasn't intentional. Only those who have looked deeply into themselves can do this. Yet, many avoid it. To acknowledge pain, especially the pain we've caused, feels like standing under a bright light with no place to hide. It exposes our imperfections. But that very act of exposure is what makes us human. When someone refuses to acknowledge what they've done, they are not just protecting their ego, they are denying an opportunity for connection. Every unspoken apology becomes a missed moment of growth, a chance to bring peace that was never taken. For the one left without acknowledgement, the wound becomes a teacher. You begin to realize how deeply the human soul craves to be understood. You realize that acknowledgement isn't about winning an argument. It's about being seen. It's about someone saying, "You didn't imagine this. What happened was real. Your feelings are valid." Without those words, you carry an invisible weight that follows you into other parts of life. You become cautious, guarded, uncertain about trusting again. Because deep down, what you fear most isn't being hurt. It's being hurt and then forgotten. In the absence of acknowledgement, your mind tries to create it for itself. You replay conversations, imagining the apology that never came. You write letters you never sent, whisper words to the air that you wish they could hear. And while it may seem like a desperate attempt to find closure, it's actually the heart's way of trying to restore balance. It's your inner self seeking validation, even if no one else provides it. Over time, you begin to understand that acknowledgement doesn't always have to come from the one who hurt you. It can also come from yourself. Acknowledgement matters because it transforms pain into wisdom. When you finally say to yourself, "Yes, I was hurt. Yes, I was treated unfairly. And yes, I deserved better," you reclaim your story. You stop waiting for someone else to name your pain for you. You name it yourself, and in that naming, something powerful happens. The confusion begins to lift. You start to separate what belongs to you and what doesn't. You realize that their refusal to acknowledge you says more about their emotional blindness than your words. Without acknowledgement, healing feels incomplete because it lacks truth. Truth is the soil where peace grows, and peace can never bloom in denial. That is why acknowledgement, whether given by others or discovered within yourself, is not just part of healing. It is healing. It's the moment when pain is no longer something that happened to you. It becomes something you have understood, something you have faced, and something you are strong enough to rise from. Anger is often the first emotion that rises when someone leaves us without explanation or apology. It's the raw, burning energy that fills the silence they left behind. It feels powerful at first, almost protective, like a shield keeping us from breaking apart completely. But over time, that same anger can start to consume the very person it was meant to protect. It becomes a storm that never ends, replaying memories, conversations, and what-ifs. We tell ourselves that our anger is justified, and it is, but what we don't realize is that holding on to it only ties us to the pain longer than necessary. Transforming anger into understanding doesn't mean excusing what happened. It means freeing ourselves from the emotional chains that keep us reliving it. Anger is the body's way of saying something was not fair. It's an instinctive cry for justice, for balance. When someone leaves abruptly or refuses to take responsibility, your mind tries to make sense of the injustice. And in that confusion, anger feels like clarity. It becomes the only emotion that makes sense in a moment where nothing else does. But if anger stays too long, it begins to harden your heart. It blinds you to the deeper truth. Beneath every ounce of anger is hurt, and beneath that hurt is care. You are angry because you once loved. You are angry because you trusted. You are angry because your kindness was met with silence. That anger in its raw form is not evil. It's love wearing armor. Transforming that energy requires awareness. It begins when you stop fighting the anger and start listening to it. What is it trying to tell you? Perhaps it's showing you the parts of yourself that still need acknowledgement. Perhaps it's showing you how deeply you wanted connection, how much you value loyalty and truth. When you begin to see anger not as an enemy, but as a messenger, its power begins to shift. It no longer controls you. It begins to guide you. You start to realize that the goal is not to destroy the anger, but to understand it. Because understanding dissolves what resistance strengthens. Many people try to suppress anger, telling themselves to move on, let it go, or be strong. But repressed anger doesn't disappear. It hides. It becomes bitterness, mistrust, or emotional numbness. It seeps into future relationships, coloring the way you love and the way you protect yourself. True transformation begins when you allow yourself to feel the anger fully, without letting it define you. You sit with it, breathe through it, and slowly start to see the truth behind it. It's not revenge you want, it's peace. And peace doesn't come from holding on to what hurt you. It comes from releasing it with awareness. There comes a moment when you look at the person who hurt you, not in admiration or resentment, but in understanding. You begin to see that their actions were never truly about you. Their inability to stay, to apologize, or to confront the truth comes from their own pain, their own fears, their own unhealed wounds. This realization doesn't erase your anger, but it transforms it. What once felt like fire becomes light, a softer, clearer kind of seeing. You start to pity what once enraged you, not because you are weak, but because compassion has replaced fury. Understanding doesn't mean you accept what they did. It means you see it for what it truly was, an act of limitation, not intention. They acted from their own brokenness, and though that doesn't justify the hurt, it explains it. Once you grasp that, your heart begins to open again, not to them but to yourself. You start to forgive, not as a favor to the one who left, but as a gift to your own soul. When anger becomes understanding, something beautiful happens inside you. The same energy that once made your heart heavy begins to fuel your healing. The same fire that once burned your peace becomes a light guiding you toward clarity. You begin to see that you don't need their apology to find closure, because the moment you understand the root of their behavior, you've already stepped beyond it. Anger served its purpose. It showed you what mattered. But understanding transforms that pain into wisdom, and wisdom is where true strength begins. Closure is one of the hardest things to find when someone leaves without saying the words you needed to hear. You wait for an explanation, for a sign, for some small moment that makes sense of everything. But sometimes that moment never comes. Sometimes the people who hurt you move on as if nothing happened. Then you're left holding pieces of a story that feels unfinished. The human heart craves closure because it craves meaning. It wants to understand why things ended, why promises were broken, why love faded. But when that understanding isn't given to you, you are forced to create it for yourself. And that becomes one of the most painful yet powerful journeys of healing. Finding closure without their apology begins with accepting that you may never get the answers you seek. There's a kind of silence you have to make peace with. A silence that doesn't contain explanations, but space for your own truth, your own reflection. Because closure doesn't always come from the person who hurt you. It comes from the moment you stop expecting them to heal the wound they caused. That shift, though slow and difficult, marks the beginning of your emotional freedom. You realize that you cannot control what others give or withhold, but you can choose what you carry forward. You might find yourself revisiting memories again and again, as if replaying them could change the ending. That's the mind's way of seeking resolution, of trying to rewrite pain into understanding. But there comes a day when you start to see those memories differently. You begin to notice the lessons hidden beneath the heartbreak. You begin to see that closure isn't about getting justice. It's about reclaiming your power. It's about saying, this chapter hurt me, but it doesn't get to define me. When you reach that place, the past no longer feels like a cage. It becomes a teacher. There's a quiet strength in deciding that your healing doesn't depend on anyone else's actions. It means you are no longer waiting for a message, a meeting, or a moment that may never arrive. Instead, you begin to create rituals of your own closure. Maybe you write a letter that you'll never send. Maybe you speak the words out loud that you once wanted them to say to you. Maybe you cry one last time, not because you're weak, but because tears are language the heart uses to release what the mind cannot explain. In those small acts, you reclaim your story. You stop being the person waiting for an apology and become the person giving yourself peace. True closure doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means removing the power it has over you. You stop needing their validation to know that your feelings were valid. You stop needing their acknowledgement to accept that you were hurt. You stop needing their explanation to understand that not everyone is capable of the same depth of care. That realization changes everything. You start seeing that the way they left was not a reflection of your worth, but of their own emotional limits. The lack of apology becomes a mirror, showing you who they truly were, not who you imagined them to be. There's also a beauty in unfinished stories. When you no longer chase closure from someone else, you discover that the ending belongs to you. You decide what it means, how it shapes you, and what you carry forward. You might not have received their apology, but you can still choose forgiveness, not for them, but for yourself. Forgiveness is your declaration that you will not let their absence poison your peace. It's your way of saying, I will not be defined by what they couldn't give. Finding closure without an apology also means learning to trust again. Not necessarily others, but yourself. You start trusting your feelings, your intuition, your ability to survive and grow. You realize that what you lost in them, you found in yourself. The ability to heal, to endure, and to rise. In that moment, closure stops being something you wait for. It becomes something you build. You start to understand that your healing was never about them at all. It was always about coming home to yourself, about standing in the space they left, and saying, even without you, I am whole. There comes a point in your healing when you realize that peace was never something they could have given you. It was something that had to be created within you, piece by piece, after the storm had passed. Becoming the peace you were denied means learning to be the calm after your own chaos. It means finding balance in a world that once felt unstable, and softness in a heart that was once hardened by pain. When you've been left without an apology, when you've been forced to pick yourself up from emotional wreckage alone, there's a special kind of strength that begins to grow inside you, a quiet strength that doesn't shout but shines. Peace doesn't come suddenly. It doesn't arrive the moment you decide you're done hurting. It comes in small, almost invisible ways. It comes the day you wake up and realize you didn't think about them the moment your eyes opened. It comes when you can revisit an old memory without feeling like your chest is collapsing. It comes when their name no longer tastes bitter in your mouth, when their silence no longer echoes inside your thoughts. These moments may seem small, but they are the signs of your healing. They show that your peace is not dependent on anyone else's actions. It is something you are slowly becoming. Becoming peace means understanding that not everything broken needs to be fixed, and not every story needs an ending. It's realizing that sometimes people come into your life to teach you lessons that only pain could deliver. You begin to see that their departure was not just a loss, but a redirection. The space they left behind becomes the space where your strength begins to grow. The emptiness that once felt unbearable turns into the silence where you finally hear your own voice again. You start listening to yourself, not the noise of what was lost, but the quiet wisdom that tells you it's time to move forward. When you become the peace you were denied, you stop waiting for anyone else to make you feel safe. You start creating safety within yourself. You set boundaries not out of fear, but out of self-respect. You learn to say no to what hurts, and yes to what nurtures. You begin to treat yourself with the same gentleness you once offered others so freely. You stop apologizing for your emotions, for your depth, for the way you love. You realize that your peace is sacred, and it's not something anyone else gets to disturb again. The transformation doesn't happen all at once. There will still be days when the memories return, when the old pain whispers that you were not enough. But even then you'll find yourself responding differently. You won't beg those thoughts to leave. You'll sit with them, breathe through them, and remind yourself that you are no longer the same person who once depended on someone else for peace. You have learned to hold your own heart gently. You have learned to trust your own light, even in the dark. Becoming the peace you were denied also means choosing understanding over resentment. It's realizing that those who hurt you were likely hurting too, even if they never said so. It's seeing that their silence, their avoidance, their inability to stay, it all came from a place of fear, not strength. You stop trying to understand them through anger, and instead you see them through compassion. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to be free of the heaviness that comes from hate. Compassion does not mean letting them back into your life. It means letting them go without bitterness. You start to feel a new kind of freedom, one that doesn't depend on what anyone else says or does. You start finding beauty in solitude, peace in reflection, and joy in small things. You realize that the apology you never got has been replaced by something greater: clarity. You see that every tear, every sleepless night, every unanswered question led you to this moment, to the version of you who no longer needs anyone's permission to feel whole. You are no longer defined by the goodbye that broke you, but by the peace that rebuilt you. You have become what you once searched for in someone else: the calm, the closure, the understanding, the love. In the end, healing from what broke you is not about receiving the words you once longed to hear. It's about realizing that you are no longer waiting for them. You deserved an apology, not a goodbye, but what you truly needed was awakening. You needed to see that peace, closure, and love were never meant to come from another person's lips. They were meant to be born from your own strength. Every unanswered question, every silent night, every tear that fell without reason was leading you back to yourself. The ones who left taught you something precious, not through their presence, but through their absence. They showed you the power of forgiveness without permission, the beauty of letting go without resentment, and the quiet dignity of standing alone without bitterness. You learned that not every ending is cruel. Some endings are sacred beginnings disguised as loss. And so, as you walk forward, may you no longer seek the apology that was never spoken. Instead, let your peace be your answer. Let your healing be your closure. Let your growth be the message they were too afraid to say. Because the truth is, you never needed their words to be whole. You only needed the courage to rise in their silence.